Hello and welcome. In this video I will have a concerned face. On a few occasions I use gaffer tape and I spill resin. Actually, quite a bit of resin. Idea behind this project was to make an end grain coffee table from a piece of timber, actually a huge log that I found on school walks with my son. I have asked local farmer if I can take a couple of slices. He gave me permission, so happy days. Welcome to the Wildtail Creative Design. As you can see, there was quite a bit of work using router in quite a few passes just to make the table or the piece a little bit flatter, a little bit easier to work with. So I took it steady, usually in a couple of mil at the time. Who can guess what's the car that I used to transport this diesel generator to power my chainsaw? Thank you, Chris. Thank you for all the help. Without you, it would be such a hard work to cut all the pieces, chuck them into the car, and I really appreciate your work, just giving me a hand. Much appreciated. Now it's time to play with all the cookies, just to get initial feel how to set it up, what is the best layout, how to arrange them. Second question, who can tell me what is the tree that I used for the project? That would be nice to know. I couldn't figure it out what it is actually. So thank you for all the suggestions. Unfortunately, all the cookies were different length at the time when I chopped them into smaller pieces. I had no idea what will be the final project. Hence, it took me a lot of time trying to figure it out, how to make them the same thickness. I used quite a few different techniques. I used the router, and it was time consuming. I had to glue each piece individually and then multiple passes to slim them down to required thickness. Plenty of dust in the process. Unfortunately, I don't have any sensible extractor to plug into my router, hence I generate a lot of dust. That is the second technique that I used. I used my Metabo thicknesser planer, and I used this one on slightly bigger cookies. Again, I had to glue each cookie individually to my board to be able to slot it through. And again, it was quite time consuming. I had to flip the pieces. Unfortunately, as you can see, sometimes the glue didn't hold the pieces sufficiently. So it was really frustrating on some occasions. That is the second, let's say, little go with the setup, how to play with the individual pieces. Usually I remove bark with chisels, and then to have a nicer finish, I use the wire brush that I attach to my power drill, and I go just one by one at the time. Probably I should have invested in some bracket that I could attach my power drill. It would be probably a little bit easier, safer, and probably easier to manhandle individual cookies. Maybe on the next project, that's something I will consider to do. At some point, the big piece has cracked, and there was a splice between one part and the other one. And at some point, I was toying myself with an idea: should I just cut it nice and just make it perfect? Hence, I even took a ruler just to check, would it be better to cut it or should I leave it rough as it was? And I have to say that I was really close just to cut it, make it nice and smooth, and then I just thought, nah, let's leave it as it is. And I think I just made a better decision by leaving those imperfections. Now it is time to use the sellotape just to make it non-stick surface for the resin for the future. I'm lining up all the cookies and I just mark them up so that I know the sequence once I will be placing each one individually, just to know where they fit, how they fit. Now it is time to attach my edge with a little bit of coke and of course screw it in. I have made at that point one mistake, that I didn't let the coke to dry sufficiently, hence it was not a good starting point, but you will see shortly what's happened. This is another project that I'm using, Glasscast. Glasscast, if you would like to sponsor me in the future, you are more than welcome. Please get in touch. I use my sink in the kitchen just to warm it up. Again, temperature in UK wasn't brilliant, hence additional few degrees of warmer resin make it so much easier to pour it, mix it, and it's just so much easier to work with. Because it was an end grain, I thought I would just seal all the pores and just to make sure that the black resin will not stain it in the future. How little I knew at that time. I was amazed, and you will see along the video how much resin I have to use to seal it, and the end grain structure was really porous and was just absorbing excuse me, all the moisture from the resin, and was just drying up very quickly. So I'm just applying resin to all the edges to reduce the amount of bubbles in the future. I thought this is the really critical point, but again, in the future you will see that there is still plenty of bubbles coming out of not the resin, but the timber itself. This is the second coat that I'm applying now. Again, I thought it would be more than enough. How little did I know at the time. It was still drying up very quickly. Now it is time to apply the coke to seal the gap between my board and the base that I'm using, that I will be casting against. Now is the sexy part, just to add a couple of droplets of black tint, and it just looks amazing. I always love that moment when you add a couple of drops, you spin it, and the whole resin suddenly just changes the color. It's really nice. And that is the first time that you can see that I'm making a little bit concerned face. I'm applying another bucket of resin, and it's disappearing somewhere, which is never a good sign. So it looks quite nice. It just fills all the voids. But again, I think I just made a little bit of a mistake, and there is a little bit of a resin spilling out. But at the time, I still carry on. I apply more and more resin, hoping that it will be good. It wasn't. You can see that there's quite a bit of resin spilling out through the crack, and I thought by applying more coke, I will solve the problem. Again, it didn't solve the problem. Now I'm going for plan B, which is a gaffer tape. Duct tape doesn't usually fix the problem, especially when you have already running resin. But when you have running resin, there is very little you can do. So I'm using duct tape, just trying to patch it up in combination with coke. Again, it's not the best solution. Maybe I'll one day find a better one. If this is still leaking, what do? You apply more coke on top of a gaffer tape, which is quite funny now, but it doesn't actually solve the problem fully, as you will see shortly. So, more is usually the answer. Apply more and more and hope that maybe it will stop leaking at some point. Of course, it didn't stop leaking. Luckily, I had a spare tube of coke, so I could go crazy with it and just apply more and more, hoping that it will fix the problem. And despite the fact that I have applied quite a substantial amount of it, in a second you can see a little droplet going through it and just running down the gaffer tape just in the middle of it. How frustrating it is. In between patching up the leaks, I'm trying to get rid of the bubbles, so my heat gun is usually sufficient to make all the bubbles pop, and it's quite easy to use. And I make another concerned face. Another inspection. Yes, it is still leaking. What can I do? More gaffer tape, duct tape, more coke. It's still leaking. Yes, more coke. Again, is it going to fix the problem? Nah, it's probably not. Can it slow it? Hopefully. So that was, I think, the second tube, just to go through that little patch-up work. At some point, I just realized that the resin is leaking because the timber is floating. So I had to come up with a clamping plan, how to hold up all the pieces in place. And I think that was a good decision, just to put a little bit of timber pieces on top of it to stack up on top of the cookies, just to hold them in place. And that way there was a little bit less spillage. Actually, you can see quite a bit that managed to escape through the cracks. But I think most of the leaks did slow down at that time. Now it is time to apply another layer to seal all the end grain. As you can see, the timber is quite dry, so I'm just applying another layer, another coat. At that time, because I had so many spillages, I just thought I'll just go with black. I wasn't entirely sure if this is the best idea. Can it just stain the timber and it will make it too dark? Luckily, all that transparent resin that I used earlier, I think did the job, so that when I applied the black one, actually down the line it didn't make it much darker. Initially, I thought that maybe a few hundred milliliters will be sufficient to seal all the end grain. Unfortunately, I was going with another 500 ml at the time. And now it is the frustrating part. You can see so many air bubbles. It's not the bubbles in the resin itself. It's just the air escaping through the timber. So I was using the heat gun just to warm it up a little bit, hoping for a better penetration, let all the air escape. And you can see those micro bubbles are just popping up constantly. It is a thin layer of resin, just a couple of millimeters, but you can see that they are back again. I use the heat gun and they pop up again. It's like a never-ending story. So I was just trying to saturate more and more the end grain, hoping that at some point it will be fully saturated and it will stop absorbing any more resin and there will be no new bubbles coming up. But you can see all the bubbles are still popping up, and it is really, really frustrating at that time. It took me quite a few goes to actually get rid of all the bubbles, apply another layer of resin so that the timber will get fully saturated. Even the dog got fed up with the amount of time it took me to pour resin. That's another batch that I'm mixing up. Another few hundred milliliters of resin, hoping that this time it will be the last go and it will be fully saturated. But in a few seconds you will see that after applying that layer, there is still a lot of dry surface, and you can see that it looks really porous, so that I would think I had to apply a couple of more to make sure that it was fully saturated. So you can see that it is still bone dry in quite a few locations. Now it is time, after applying another few layers, to take out this out of the mold. It took me a bit of time, a bit of brute force just to take it off. As well, I had to remove all that coke that I used in excess across the project. Unfortunately, that tape was not 100% non-sticky tape, and I think there was a little bit of resin sticking to it. But slowly, with a little bit of hammer, and I managed to peel it off. If in doubt, use more hammer, more force. Thank you, Ian, for letting me use your machines, your time, your experience, your expertise. This is a 1.1 belt sander. Without it, it would just take me forever to make it flat and nice. And in couple of goes, couple of passes, we got a really nice finish. Of course, it needed a little bit of more quality later on, but it was just a time-saving exercise, money well spent. Thank you, Ian, again. And Ian even helped me out and cut nicely on his huge table saw the piece so that it was a really nice straight edge. Thanks again, Ian. I do enjoy your knowledge, experience, and all the support. Thank you very much. It is just half an hour drive for me from home to Ian's place, but it's always worth it. Next one is make a provision for leg attachment. I usually use threaded inserts. On that occasion, I've made a mistake and I bought some set from Amazon or eBay. Unfortunately, I lost a track of from where I got it. Otherwise, I would just have placed a link with a warning not to buy it. Such a crap quality. It's just unbelievable. So you will be able to see in a second. I try to get the first one in, and it was going okay. But then the next one just snapped, and it is so frustrating because once it's snapped, then you cannot even take it out easily. So I had a few goes later on, and I tried, let's say, on a sacrificial piece of timber just to see maybe I did something wrong, maybe the pilot hole was too small, but that was not the case. So I had to take the edges off so that it will be still flush with the recess in the timber. On the right hand side you can see my trial and error. Unfortunately, all of them failed miserably. So that was a huge disappointment. And later on, you will see that I bought a fresh set from Amazon that was much superior quality, and they just did the trick. Again, Rubio, if you would like to sponsor me in the future, I would like you to get in touch. My little helper, my daughter, came to do the fun part, and clearly she enjoyed it. Now it is the fun part, just to apply all the finishing coats of Rubio Monocoat. I love this part. All the features, grain characteristics just pop up, and suddenly you can see the depth of the timber, all the little natural imperfections or features of the timber just come up to life. That's the most satisfying part for me. Anyway, clearly my daughter enjoyed it as well, which is always nice to do something with my kids. After so many layers of applied resin, finally this end grain piece got fully saturated with resin, and it was just absorbing Rubio Monocoat. It was, I think, the right balance, that it was on one hand fully saturated with resin, but then it was still able to nicely be coated with Rubio Monocoat, and it was a good combination. So that was the outcome after the first layer of Rubio Monocoat. You can still see that there is still excess of rubio on the timber and the resin, so I will wipe it off in a couple of minutes just to get rid of any excess, so you can still see on the black some little streaks, and that's something that will be wiped off in a few minutes. Finally, the correct set of timber inserts, screws came in, and it's such a relief to fit in something that goes in, doesn't snap, and it's so much easier to work with. So it's so frustrating with the previous one. This one suddenly was like a new product that made me smile again, and no frustration. All of them went in easily without nothing snapping. So it was just a different level of quality of the product. I will try to save the link to the specific one in the comments below if you would be interested. And that's the comparison between old one, which was absolutely piss poor quality, versus the new one on the right hand side. Such a huge difference. Unfortunately, I managed to screw in 3 of those, and then I couldn't take them out. Now it is time to break the surface and just gently do it by hand, or if you are less patient as I am on some occasions, just to gently break the surface of the monocoat. I know that in theory, as the name suggests, it should be just single coat. However, I find that having 2 layers of the rubio gives a nicer finish, a little bit more durable, and a little bit more sheen, and just the overall presentation of the final piece is just a tiny better after applying 2 coats of rubio monocoat. This piece of timber has plenty of character, and all the little cookies cut at an angle just create that weird 3D impressions. Some of my colleagues, when saw that piece later on, they said, oh, that the straight edge, it looks almost fake and it doesn't almost look real because of those weird shape imperfections and just the changes of the geometry. So this is the image after the second coat has been applied. Again, I will be wiping off excess in a couple of minutes, usually 10-15 minutes. I did let it dry for at least 24 hours after the application of rubio. And now it is time to finally assemble legs. And I do like the option to use those timber threaded inserts because the assembly is just a breeze and it's just so easy to get it in. I noticed that on some occasions, I think I'm using M5 bolts, that there is just slot in one direction in the legs. Probably if there would be an oversized hole in the other direction, I think the whole assembly would be a little bit easier, because at the end of the day there are small imperfections that the screws and the holes and the inserts are not always in line, and just to have all 6 to line up at the same time, it could be sometimes a little bit tricky, but that's the final outcome after assembling all the legs. I have to say that I still like both top and bottom of the table. I couldn't decide initially which one should be top, which one should be bottom, because both of them look just amazing. And that is the final product after 2 coats, and there is plenty of depth in that timber, and rubio highlighted all those little features. Interestingly, the photographs and videos that are taken in my living room are after a year of use and abuse of the table. So it is a year of spilling water, having wet glasses, some spilled wine, spilled juice, spilled Coke, and effectively after a year I can report that's the image of 2 years of use and abuse, and there are no stains, no marks, nothing on the table. So I'm really impressed with overall durability of the finish. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and see you shortly.